Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope and watched the massive space station grow larger on the screen. The station was bigger than any city on Earth, and it sparkled with lights that seemed to dance like stars. This was Centros, Prime, the heart of the Galactic Council that ruled over 12 star systems. Jake had dreamed of this moment for years, but now he felt nervous about what they would find here. Dr. Lisa Carter walked up beside him and pointed at the strange ships moving around the station. Some looked like floating crystals that glowed with inner light. Others were more like clouds of gas that somehow held together in the shape of ships. The strangest ones looked alive, with skin that moved and changed color as they flew. Lisa had studied alien life for most of her adult life, but seeing so many different species in one place still amazed her. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes checked his weapons systems one more time, even though he knew they would not help much here. The ships around them could destroy Terra's Hope without even trying hard. Kevin had been a soldier for 15 years, and he could tell when he was outgunned. The aliens had technology that humans could barely understand, and weapons that could turn planets into dust. Still, he kept his hand near the controls, because that was what soldiers did. Ambassador Helen Wright sat in her chair and read through her notes for the 100th time. She had spent 3 years preparing for this meeting with the Galactic Council. Earth's government had chosen her because she was good at talking to difficult people and finding ways to make deals work. But she had never tried to make a deal with aliens who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Helen wondered if the Council would even listen to what humans had to say. The radio crackled and a voice spoke in perfect English. The words sounded cold and mechanical, like they came from a computer instead of a living being. The voice told them to follow a small ship to the docking area and warned them not to change course or use any weapons. Jake guided Terra's Hope through the maze of alien ships while trying not to stare at the creatures he could see through their windows. The docking bay was huge enough to hold 100 ships like theirs. Strange robots with too many arms grabbed their ship and pulled it into place. Jake could see other ships from species he had never heard of. Some looked old and worn down, while others seemed brand new. All of them were much smaller than the ships belonging to the 5 main council races. Navigator Sam Collins had been studying the layout of the station during their approach. He noticed that ships from different species were kept in separate areas, like they were not allowed to mix together. The council ships had the best docking spots near the center, while everyone else was pushed to the edges. Sam had grown up in a military family, and he knew what segregation looked like when he saw it. As they waited for permission to leave their ship, Dr. Carter used her instruments to scan the area around them. She found traces of dozens of different types of alien life, but something seemed wrong about the readings. Many of the life signs looked weak or incomplete, like the aliens were sick or injured. Lisa had expected to find a vibrant community of different species working together, but instead she sensed fear and sadness. Chief Engineer Ben Parker worked on their communication system to make sure it would work with alien technology. Ben was good at fixing things and making different machines work together. As he adjusted the settings, he picked up fragments of conversations in languages he could not understand. Most of the voices sounded tired or afraid, and Ben began to wonder what kind of place they had come to. Finally, a group of council guards came to escort them from their ship. The guards looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs and wore armor that seemed to grow from their skin. Their eyes were cold and showed no emotion as they gestured for the humans to follow them. Jake noticed that the guards carried weapons that hummed with energy, and their movements were too perfect, like machines pretending to be alive. The corridors of the station were wide enough for creatures much larger than humans. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, and the air tasted metallic. Helen tried to memorize everything she saw because she knew this information might be important later. The other species they passed in the hallways looked down at the ground and moved quickly like they were afraid of being noticed. They were taken to a waiting area filled with uncomfortable chairs that seemed designed for bodies very different. from human ones. A screen on the wall showed images of the 5 council races in all their power and glory. The crystalline Vorthak controlled all technology. The gaseous Etherians managed communication across the galaxy. The reptilian Saurid enforced the Council's will with their armies. The insect-like Nexari handled logistics and supplies. The amphibious Aquatic Federation controlled water and other resources. Hours passed, and then days, as the humans waited for their chance to speak with the Council. Other aliens came and went, but none of them would look at the humans or answer their questions. Jake began to understand that they were being ignored on purpose to show them how unimportant Earth was in the grand scheme of things. The waiting was part of the test, and the humans were already failing by Council standards. As their 3rd day of waiting began, Lisa made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about the Galactic Council and their perfect civilization. Dr. Lisa Carter found the first clue while studying the air composition in their waiting room. Her instruments detected chemical traces that told a story the Council did not want anyone to know. The air contained fear pheromones from dozens of different species and stress hormones that indicated widespread suffering. Lisa realized that the perfect order of the Council was built on the terror of those they ruled. Commander Ryan Blake had been exploring the station during their long wait, and he discovered areas where the forgotten species lived. These aliens worked as servants and laborers while the Council races enjoyed lives of luxury. Ryan met a wolf-like creature called Fenari, who cleaned the floors in the lower levels. The Fenari told him in broken English that his people once flew between stars and fought great battles, but the Council had taken away their ships and weapons generations ago. The Fenari's name was Howl in Darkness, and his eyes held intelligence that the Council pretended did not exist. He told Ryan that his people were natural warriors and explorers, but they had been forced to become janitors and maintenance workers. The Council claimed this was for everyone's safety, but Howl in Darkness knew the truth. His people had been too proud and too strong, so they had to be broken. Dr. Carter continued her secret research and found evidence of systematic suppression that went back thousands of years. She discovered that the plant-like Verdani had once created living technology that could grow and adapt, but the Council had declared it too dangerous. Now the Verdani were only allowed to tend gardens and grow food for other species. Their incredible biotechnology was forbidden, and anyone who tried to use it disappeared. Navigator Sam Collins hacked into the station's historical databases while pretending to update their ship's star charts. What he found made his blood run cold. Records showed that over 50 different species had made first contact with the Council in the past 3,000 years. Only 20 of those species still existed, and most of them had been reduced to servant races like the Fenari and Verdani. The missing species had not been destroyed in wars or natural disasters. Instead, they had been slowly strangled by Council policies that prevented technological advancement and cultural development. Each species had been assigned a role in the galactic ecosystem and forbidden from growing beyond those limits. Those who refused to accept their place simply faded away over generations until nothing remained but empty worlds and forgotten names. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes learned about the military structure that enforced this system when he befriended a Saurid guard who seemed different from the others. The guard's name was Slash of Claws, and he had moments when his cold reptilian mask slipped to reveal something like sadness. Kevin discovered that the Saurid had not always been emotionless soldiers. They had once been a passionate people who loved art and music, but the Council had used drugs and conditioning to turn them into perfect weapons. Slash of Claws told Kevin about the treatments all Saurid received from birth to suppress their emotions and independent thinking. The process was called optimization, and it created soldiers who would follow any order without question. Some Saurid fought against the conditioning, but those who showed too much personality were sent for additional treatment until nothing remained of their original selves. Chief Engineer Ben Parker made contact with a Vorthak crystal smith who worked in the station's technology sectors. The Vorthak called himself Bright Spark, and he was one of the few of his kind who had refused the collective consciousness that most Vorthak shared. Bright Spark explained that his people had once been individuals like humans, but the Council had convinced them that joining a group mind would make them more efficient. Most Vorthak now existed as part of a vast network that thought and acted as one. They had become living computers that served the Council's needs without question or complaint. Bright Spark had hidden his individuality for centuries by pretending to be part of the collective while secretly maintaining his own thoughts and feelings. He told Ben that there were others like him, but they had to be very careful not to be discovered. Ambassador Helen Wright finally received word that the Council would see her, but the meeting was not what she had expected. Instead of being brought before the 5 ruling species, she was taken to a small office where a minor Etherian bureaucrat waited with a standard contract. The Etherian spoke in a voice like wind through metal and explained that Earth could join the galactic community by accepting protection status under the Council. The protection treaty would place humanity under permanent supervision by Council, advisors who would guide their technological and social development. Humans would be allowed to keep their homeworld, but they could not expand beyond their solar system without Council permission. Any human technology that the Council deemed dangerous would be confiscated, and any human who refused to follow Council guidance would be relocated to a more suitable environment. Helen read through the contract and realized it was the same deal that had been offered to every other species. The Council was not interested in partnership or cooperation. They wanted complete control over humanity's future, just like they controlled everyone else. The treaty was written in language that sounded helpful and protective, but every clause was designed to prevent humans from ever threatening Council supremacy. Dr. Carter shared her findings with the rest of the team, and they began to understand the full scope of what they were facing. The Galactic Council was not a government or alliance, but a system of oppression that had kept the galaxy locked in stagnation for millennia. Every species had been assigned a role and forbidden from growing beyond it. Those who refused to accept their limitations were eliminated not through violence, but through slow, systematic destruction of their culture and technology. The humans realized they had a choice to make. They could sign the treaty and accept a future of servitude like so many others before them, or they could find a way to fight back against a system that had crushed dozens of civilizations and ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The decision would determine not only humanity's fate, but the future of every species still struggling under Council control. As night fell on the station, the humans began to plan their next move. Ambassador Helen Wright looked at the protection treaty one more time before pushing it away from her across the metal table. The Etherian bureaucrat made a sound like wind through broken glass and asked if she needed more time to consider the generous offer. Helen stood up and told the creature that humanity would never accept slavery disguised as protection. The Etherian's gaseous form flickered with what might have been surprise before it began speaking rapidly into a communication device. Captain Jake Morrison knew they had just declared war on the most powerful force in the galaxy, but he felt proud of his species for the first time since arriving at the station. He gathered his crew and told them they were now fugitives who could not return to their ship or contact Earth through normal channels. The Council would be watching everything they did and waiting for them to make a mistake that would justify harsh punishment. Chief Engineer Ben Parker had been preparing for this moment since Dr. Carter shared her discoveries about the suppressed species. He activated a device he had built from spare parts that would scramble Council surveillance in a small area around them. The device would not work for long, but it gave them enough time to slip away from their official quarters and disappear into the vast maze of the station's lower levels. Howlin' Darkness was waiting for them in a maintenance tunnel that smelled of recycled air and alien sweat. The Fenari warrior led them through passages that only the servant species knew about, while explaining that news of their refusal had already spread throughout the underground community. For the first time in generations, someone had said no to the Council and lived to tell about it. The hidden areas of the station were like a different world from the clean, bright spaces where the Council races lived. Here, dozens of suppressed species worked and lived in cramped conditions while dreaming of the freedom their ancestors had known. Dr. Lisa Carter saw aliens she had never imagined existing and realized that the Council had been hiding the true diversity of galactic life from new species like humanity. Bright Spark, the Vorthak, was waiting in a chamber filled with broken crystal technology that he had been secretly repairing. The individual Vorthak explained that many of his people wanted to break free from the collective consciousness, but they needed someone to show them it was possible. Humans represented hope because they had the one thing that most species had, forgotten how to use: the ability to refuse. Navigator Sam Collins worked with Bright Spark to establish a secret communication network that could reach the suppressed species on other worlds. They used Vorthak crystal technology combined with human computer programming to create messages that could slip past Council monitoring systems. The first transmissions were simple, but their meaning was revolutionary. Resistance was possible, and help was coming. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes trained with Howl in Darkness and other Fenari who remembered the old ways of fighting. The wolf-like aliens taught him pack-hunting tactics that could work in the station's corridors, while he showed them human military strategies that emphasized flexibility and adaptation. Together, they began planning ways to strike at Council control systems while avoiding the heavily armed Saurid guards. Commander Ryan Blake discovered that the resistance network was larger than anyone had imagined. Suppressed species throughout the station had been waiting for a catalyst to unite them, and humanity had provided exactly what they needed. A Verdani named Grows in Shadow had been secretly developing biotechnology that could disable Council weapons. An individual Etherian called Whisper of Truth had been collecting evidence of Council crimes for decades. The Resistance faced enormous challenges because the Council controlled every aspect of life on the station. Food, air, water, and power all flowed through systems monitored by Council technology. The Nexari hive mind processed every transaction and communication, while Saurid patrols enforced strict schedules that kept different species separated. Breaking free would require simultaneously taking control of multiple critical systems. Dr. Carter worked with Grows in Shadow to understand how Verdani biotechnology could be weaponized against Council forces. The plant-like alien had spent years growing organisms that could eat through Vorthak crystals and neutralize Saurid weapons. The living technology was almost ready, but it needed to be distributed throughout the station without the Council noticing. Ben Parker and Bright Spark developed a plan to take control of the station's power grid using a combination of human engineering and Vorthak crystal manipulation. They would need to access the central core where Council security was strongest, but success would give them leverage over every system on the station. The plan was dangerous and had little chance of working, but it was their only hope of creating enough chaos to break the Council's control. Ambassador Wright met with leaders from each suppressed species to coordinate their efforts and ensure that everyone understood the risks they were taking. Many of the aliens had been slaves for so long that they found it hard to imagine freedom, but Wright's passion convinced them that change was possible. She promised that humans would stand with them no matter what happened, but she also warned that failure would mean extinction for all of them. The Resistance discovered that they had one major advantage the Council had not anticipated. Humans were still in contact with their homeworld, and Earth's government had been secretly building a fleet of advanced ships using technology reverse-engineered from Council surveillance devices. The fleet was still months away, but it represented backup that no previous Resistance had possessed. Howl in Darkness brought disturbing news from his contacts among the Saurid guards. Grand Marshal Thexivore had become suspicious about unusual activities on the station and was planning a security sweep that would expose everyone connected to the Resistance. They had less than 2 days to act before their hiding places were discovered and their leaders were arrested. The Resistance leaders met in an abandoned storage bay to finalize their plans. Each group would strike simultaneously at different targets throughout the station, while the humans led an assault on the central command center. Success would free every suppressed species in the galaxy, but failure would doom them all to a fate worse than death. As the meeting ended and the conspirators scattered to their positions, Sam Collins intercepted a transmission from Earth that changed everything. The human fleet had encountered a massive council armada moving toward Earth's solar system. Humanity's homeworld was about to face the same choice that dozens of species had faced before: submit to council rule or be destroyed. The stakes had just become much higher than anyone had imagined. Grand Marshal Thexivore activated the station's emergency protocols as his Saurid patrols began sweeping every section for signs of rebellion. The reptilian commander had served the council for over 2 centuries, and his enhanced senses could detect the chemical signatures of fear and excitement that indicated conspiracy. Something was happening on his station, and he intended to crush it before it could spread. Captain Jake Morrison led his team through maintenance shafts toward the communication center, where Whisper of Truth waited with crucial intelligence. The individual Etherian had discovered that most of his gaseous species were not willing participants in the Council's oppression, but were trapped within the communication network like prisoners. They desperately wanted freedom but had been conditioned to believe escape was impossible. Dr. Lisa Carter crawled through a ventilation system with samples of Grows-in Shadow's biotechnology hidden in her equipment pack. The Verdani organisms looked like ordinary plant seeds, but they would grow rapidly when exposed to the right chemical signals and begin eating through council control systems. Lisa had to reach 12 different locations throughout the station and plant the seeds before Saurid patrols discovered what she was doing. Chief Engineer Ben Parker and Bright Spark reached the power core after disabling security sensors with a combination of human hacking techniques and Vorthak crystal manipulation. The central chamber was larger than a football stadium and filled with energy conduits that supplied power to every system on the station. Taking control would be difficult, but Ben had noticed weaknesses in the Council's over-engineered technology that human simplicity could exploit. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes moved through the lower levels with a pack of Fenari warriors who had painted their fur with symbols that had been forbidden for generations. Howl in Darkness explained that the markings told the story of their people's greatest victories and reminded them who they had been before the Council broke their spirit. Tonight, the Fenari would remember how to hunt as a coordinated pack. Commander Ryan Blake coordinated the resistance from a hidden command center while monitoring Council communications through equipment Bright Spark had modified. He watched as Saurid patrols moved through predetermined patterns and realized that the conditioning that made them perfect soldiers also made them predictable. Their inability to think creatively would become a weakness when facing opponents who refused to follow standard tactics. Navigator Sam Collins had reached the communication array where Whisper of Truth was waiting with information that changed everything the humans thought they knew about the Council's power structure. The individual Etherian revealed that the communication network was not controlled by the Council, but was actually a prison system that held thousands of his people captive. They were forced to process information and relay orders while their consciousness slowly dissolved into the collective system. Dr. Carter successfully planted biotechnology seeds in 6 locations before a Saurid patrol spotted her near the weapons storage facility. She activated her emergency beacon to warn the others while the Verdani organisms began their work of eating through control circuits and security systems. The living technology spread faster than the Council had thought possible because it had been designed specifically to counter their crystalline and metallic infrastructure. Ben Parker and Bright Spark discovered that the power core was defended by systems they had not expected when energy barriers activated around them and alarms began screaming throughout the station. The Vorthak collective consciousness had detected their presence and was trying to trap them before they could damage critical components. Ben realized they would need to fight their way out while somehow completing their mission. Whisper of Truth began the liberation of the communication network by sending a specific frequency pattern that awakened dormant consciousness entrapped Etherians throughout the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, thousands of gaseous beings remembered who they had been before being absorbed into the Council's information system. Their awakening created chaos in communication networks across 12 star systems as they began transmitting the truth about Council oppression to every species simultaneously. The Fenari Pack, led by Howl in Darkness, struck at military command centers while ancient hunting songs echoed through corridors that had not heard such sounds for generations. The wolf-like warriors moved with coordination that surprised Saurid guards who had forgotten that their prisoners had once been formidable opponents. Kevin Barnes fought alongside them and marveled at how quickly they adapted human tactics to their own natural abilities. Slash of Claws was leading a Saurid patrol when the liberation signal reached him through hidden communication channels that Ryan Blake had established. The reptilian soldier felt something he had not experienced since childhood as suppressed emotions began breaking through chemical conditioning. For the first time in decades, he remembered his real name and the family that had been taken from him when he was selected for military optimization. Across the station, other Saurid began experiencing similar awakenings as the Resistance's signal disrupted the chemical systems that suppressed their natural personalities. Some fought against the returning emotions, but others embraced the pain and joy of remembering who they had been. Those who broke free from their conditioning found themselves facing a choice between continuing to serve their oppressors or joining the rebellion. Dr. Carter was cornered by 3 Saurid guards in a storage bay when one of them suddenly stopped and stared at his weapon as if seeing it for the first time. The soldier named Strike Without Warning dropped his energy rifle and told his companions that he would not fight for the Council anymore. The other guards hesitated in confusion as their conditioning warred with awakening consciousness. Ambassador. Helen Wright broadcast a message to every species in the galaxy using the liberated communication network, while Council forces tried desperately to shut down transmissions. She told the universe that the age of Council oppression was ending, and that every species had the right to determine their own destiny. Her words reached civilizations that had lived in fear for thousands of years and gave them hope that freedom was possible. Ben Parker and Bright Spark succeeded in taking control of the power grid despite fierce resistance from Council security systems. They immediately began shutting down the systems that maintained social control while boosting power to areas where resistance fighters were operating. The station's lights flickered as energy flowed in new patterns that had not been seen since the Council's rise to power. Grows in Shadow's biotechnology reached critical mass as living organisms spread throughout the station's infrastructure and began dismantling Council control systems from within. The Verdani's creations were more than just weapons. They were a new form of life that could think and adapt as they worked to free other species from technological oppression. As the rebellion reached its peak, sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching the station from deep space. Earth's fleet had arrived earlier than expected, and they were not alone. Ships from dozens of liberated worlds were converging on the Council's capital to support the revolution that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The space around Centros Prime erupted into chaos as Earth's fleet emerged from hyperspace, followed by ships from worlds that had been silent for centuries. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the station's command center as vessels he had never seen before joined the battle against Council forces. These were the survivors of species thought extinct, hidden colonies that had escaped Council detection, and rebels who had been waiting for this moment for generations. Grand Marshal Thexfor stood in his war room surrounded by displays showing the collapse of Council control throughout the galaxy. His conditioning told him to maintain order at any cost, but the awakening emotions in his mind screamed that everything he had fought for was wrong. The chemical suppressors that had controlled him for over 200 years were breaking down as Verdani biotechnology spread through the station's life support systems. Dr. Lisa Carter reached the final location on her mission just as Saurid reinforcements arrived to stop her. The reptilian soldiers moved with perfect coordination until one of them suddenly broke formation and turned his weapon on his companions. Slash of Claws had made his choice, and other Saurid throughout the station were making the same decision, as their suppressed personalities fought to resurface. Chief Engineer Ben Parker and Bright Spark worked frantically to maintain control of the power grid, while Council technicians tried to shut down their access. The Vorthak Collective was fighting back by attempting to reassert control over their individual member, but Bright Spark's example had inspired others to break free. Across the galaxy, individual Vorthak were disconnecting from the group mind and remembering what it felt like to think their own thoughts. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes and the Fenari Pack fought their way through corridors filled with Saurid who could no longer tell friend from enemy. The conditioning that had made them perfect. Soldiers was becoming their greatest weakness as awakening emotions confused their decision-making processes. Some Saurid fought desperately to maintain their programming, while others threw down their weapons and begged for forgiveness. Commander Ryan Blake coordinated the battle from his hidden command center while watching the most incredible transformation in galactic history unfold on his screens. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together against their common oppressor. Fenari Pack tactics combined with Verdani biotechnology, while individual Vorthak provided technical support to freed Etherians who were spreading truth throughout the communication networks. Howl in Darkness led his pack in a charge against the military command center where Grand Marshal Thexvor was making his last stand. The Fenari warrior had painted his face with the symbols of his ancestors, and his howl carried across the station like a battle cry that awakened something primal in every suppressed species. For the first time in generations, the servants remembered they had once been warriors. Navigator Sam Collins established communication with the approaching fleet and learned that Earth had not been idle during the months since Terra's Hope departed. Human engineers had been working with defectors from other species to build ships that incorporated the best technology from dozens of civilizations. The vessels approaching the station represented a new kind of cooperation that the Council had tried to prevent. Whisper of Truth and the liberated Etherians created a communication network that allowed real-time coordination between resistance cells across 12 star systems. For the first time, suppressed species could share information and tactics instantly, while bypassing Council monitoring completely. The revolution was spreading faster than anyone had thought possible because the truth was finally flowing freely through the galaxy. Dr. Carter planted the last biotechnology seed in the central core just as Grand Marshal Thexvor's forces surrounded her position. The Verdani organisms immediately began their final phase of growth as living technology spread throughout the station's most critical systems. Council control mechanisms started shutting down one by one as biological circuits replaced crystalline ones and organic intelligence took over from mechanical programming. Ben Parker watched in amazement as the station's systems began operating in ways their creators had never intended. Grows in Shadow's biotechnology was not just destroying Council infrastructure, but replacing it with something better. The living systems were more efficient and more adaptable than anything the Council had built because they could think and learn as they worked. Ambassador Helen Wright stood in the main communication center and addressed every species in the galaxy simultaneously as Council jamming systems failed one by one. She told them that the age of artificial limitations was ending and that every civilization would now be free to reach its full potential. Her words carried across space to worlds that had forgotten what hope felt like and sparked uprisings on planets that had been quiet for centuries. The battle for the station reached its climax when Grand Marshal Thexvor finally broke free from his conditioning completely and saw the true horror of what he had been forced to do. The reptilian commander looked at his hands and remembered every species he had helped suppress and every civilization he had helped destroy. His roar of anguish echoed through the corridors as he turned his weapons against the systems he had spent his life protecting. Bright Spark and other individual Vorthak worked together to shut down the collective consciousness that had enslaved their people for millennia. The crystal networks that had forced them to think, as one began going dark as individual minds reasserted their independence. The process was painful, and many Vorthak struggled to remember how to exist as separate beings, but the freedom was worth any amount of suffering. The space battle around the station turned in favor of the Liberation Fleet as more council ships defected rather than fight against their own awakening crews. Saurid commanders who had broken free from conditioning ordered their vessels to stand down, while Vorthak technicians sabotaged weapons systems from within. The Council's military might was crumbling as fast as their political control. Captain Morrison received a transmission from Earth informing him that similar uprisings were occurring throughout Council space, as the liberation signal spread from world to world. Civilizations that had been silent for thousands of years were suddenly broadcasting their existence, while species thought extinct emerged from hiding to join the revolution. As the last Council strongholds fell and the station's systems came under complete resistance control, the true scope of what they had accomplished became clear. The Galactic Council that had ruled for over 3,000 years had been overthrown in a single day by the combined efforts of every species they had oppressed. The galaxy would never be the same again. But victory brought new challenges as the resistance leaders realized they now had to build something better from the ruins of the old order. 3 months after the fall of the Galactic Council, Captain Jake Morrison stood in what had once been the Grand Assembly Hall and marveled at the changes that had transformed the station. Where cold, crystalline walls had once enforced rigid hierarchy, living Verdani technology now grew in beautiful patterns that adapted to the needs of different species. The space buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of civilizations worked together to build something the galaxy had never seen before. Dr. Lisa Carter had established the Biological Research Collective in the former Council laboratories, where species from across the galaxy shared their knowledge freely for the first time in millennia. Verdani biotechnicians worked alongside human geneticists, while freed Vorthak provided crystal-based computing power to support experiments that would have been impossible under the old regime. The discoveries emerging from their collaboration promised to revolutionize life throughout the galaxy. Chief Engineer Ben Parker led teams of mixed-species engineers who were redesigning the station's infrastructure to accommodate everyone's needs instead of enforcing separation between different groups. Human adaptability combined with Vorthak, precision and Fenari instincts to create solutions that no single species could have developed alone. The new systems were more efficient and more beautiful than anything the Council had built. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes had been chosen to command the new Galactic Defense Force that would protect the emerging alliance from any remaining Council loyalists or external threats. His forces included former Saurid soldiers who had volunteered to serve under more humane leadership alongside Fenari warriors who brought ancient tactical knowledge and human marines who provided flexibility and innovation. Commander Ryan Blake worked with representatives from every liberated species to draft the Charter of Galactic Liberation that would govern their new alliance. Unlike the Council's rigid hierarchy, the Charter emphasized voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit while protecting each species' right to develop their own culture and technology without interference from others. Navigator Sam Collins had been promoted to head of the new communication network that connected liberated worlds throughout the galaxy. Working with freed Etherians, he had created a system based on transparency and free information exchange rather than control and censorship. For the first time in thousands of years, every species could communicate directly with any other, without their messages being filtered through Council bureaucracy. Ambassador Helen Wright found herself serving as the first president of the Galactic Liberation Alliance, despite her protests that she was not qualified to lead such a diverse group. The other species had insisted that humanity's role as catalyst for the revolution earned them the right to guide the early stages of rebuilding. Helen accepted the responsibility, but made sure that real power was shared equally among all member species. Howl in Darkness had returned to his homeworld to help other Fenari remember their proud heritage after generations of forced servitude. Pack leaders who had hidden their true nature for decades emerged from the shadows to teach young Fenari the hunting songs and warrior traditions that the Council had tried to erase. The wolf-like species was rebuilding its civilization, while maintaining the lessons they had learned about cooperation and unity. Bright Spark worked with other individual Vorthak to help their people adjust to life outside the collective consciousness that had defined them for millennia. Many struggled with the concept of personal identity, but those who successfully made the transition discovered creativity and innovation they had never known existed. The crystal technology they developed as individuals far surpassed anything the collective had produced. Grows in Shadow had become the unofficial leader of the Verdani as they emerged from their assigned role as gardeners to reveal the full extent of their biotechnological capabilities. The living ships they grew could travel faster than any mechanical vessel, while the biological computers they cultivated could process information in ways that amazed even the Vorthak. Their technology was helping to heal worlds damaged by Council exploitation. Whisper of Truth led the effort to free the remaining Etherians still trapped in communication networks throughout the galaxy. Each liberation required careful work to separate individual consciousness from the systems they had been forced to inhabit, but the process was succeeding. Free Etherians proved to be natural diplomats who helped different species understand each other, despite vast cultural differences. Grand Marshal Thexvor had become one of the most effective advocates for galactic healing, as he traveled from world to world apologizing for the Council's crimes and helping other Saurid break free from their conditioning. His transformation from perfect soldier to passionate reformer inspired many others to reject their programming and embrace the emotions they had been taught to suppress. The former Council species faced difficult choices as their old system of dominance collapsed around them. Most chose integration with the new alliance, but some retreated to isolated worlds where they tried to maintain their former superiority. The alliance respected their choice while making it clear that any attempt to reimpose Council rule would be met with united resistance. Dr. Carter made a breakthrough discovery when she realized that the Council's greatest crime had been preventing the natural evolution of galactic civilization. Each species possessed unique capabilities that could benefit everyone but the Council, had forced them into narrow roles that wasted their potential. The new alliance was allowing each species to explore their abilities fully for the first time. Ben Parker's engineering teams completed the transformation of Centros Prime into a symbol of cooperation rather than oppression. The station now served as a meeting place where any species could come to share knowledge and seek help with their problems. The architecture itself told the story of liberation, as organic curves replaced rigid angles and living systems grew alongside mechanical ones. As the first anniversary of liberation approached, Jake Morrison reflected on how much had changed since Terra's Hope first arrived at the Council station. Humanity had indeed risen to play a crucial role in galactic affairs, but not through conquest or domination. Instead, they had shown other species that refusing to accept artificial limitations could lead to something better than anyone had imagined. The galaxy still faced challenges as dozens of species worked to overcome millennia of forced separation and rebuild civilizations that had been nearly destroyed. But the progress was remarkable as cooperation replaced competition and innovation flourished in the absence of Council restrictions. New technologies emerged daily from the combination of different species' knowledge, while artistic and cultural exchanges enriched everyone's understanding of what was possible. Sam Collins established communication with distant galaxies where rumors of the Council's fall had inspired other liberation movements. The revolution that began with humanity's refusal to accept slavery was spreading beyond their own galaxy, as other species learned that freedom was possible if they were willing to fight for it. The age of the Galactic Council had ended not with the destruction of the old order, but with its transformation into something that served all species, rather than just a chosen few. Humanity's rise had indeed marked the end of an era, but it had also marked the beginning of a future where every species could reach for the stars without fear of having their wings clipped by those who claimed to know what was best for everyone.